as Ben is going to come on and talk about Macron leaks, I wanted to ask everybody something that I'm very curious about. Candidate Macron banned RT and Sputnik from coming to some of his campaign events. He said openly, as a candidate, they are not media, they are not real journalists, I'm not letting them in, I'm not letting them cover me. And he has continued that kind of speech with President Putin in his meeting. He said openly in front of Putin, they're not real journalists and real media. How many people here think that's the best way to handle at least those two Russian outlets? Do you think that's good to keep them out? Nobody. One person, two people, three think that it's a good idea to keep them out, to not even give them the facade of being media. Will that make things any better? I mean, the people who believe them won't think any differently whether they were inside the room with Macron or out, right? Well, you don't lose anything, maybe. I like it because as a journalist who works hard, I think it's good to put to distinguish them from us, but. Don't let them pretend. Don't help them pretend.
I mean, let's turn the question around slightly. Looking aside from the question of the ban, who wants to put their hand up and say that RT and Sputnik are just normal journalists? Do they do the same job as the journalists in the room?
Somebody.
Can we get a mic, incidentally? I think we might be losing the other side of the room. So.
I don't know if I agree with you. Oh, we can't hear.
Yeah.
Sorry. One of the work that I do in as an Intel analyst, this is something, we come across RT a lot, and I have said to all of my analysts, you absolutely cannot use them as a source. And the argument that I get back is always, well, they do some good reporting. No, they do reporting that looks like good reporting with a lot of disinformation in it. But they have, in the past, Larry King has been, featured on RT, right? So people who are recognizable Western journalists showing up on RT, which then makes it look like a more legitimate outlet. And I think that's part of the confusion that people have in the U.S. in particular, because the U.S., of course, a lot of people in the U.S. have not been particularly educated on what RT was about, what they were doing until very, very recently.
Should Al Jazeera be thrown in there, Ben?
I am not a regular Al Jazeera follower, so I wouldn't want to go into detail.
And I read a lot of Al Jazeera stuff, too, because they cover issues that only Al Jazeera covers,
they do.
Right?
They do.
And so you sometimes need those inputs when you're looking at what's going on in the Middle East. You just don't expect them to cover Qatar, but that whole issue that's going on in the Middle East right now with the Saudis and some of the other countries wanting them to shut down Al Jazeera because of the way they cover their countries. So it does take you to that other spot, which is if we were to say RT, you can't come in here, then you have the other side saying, well, Washington Post, you can't come in here. Well, and so that's the flip side, and that's really
which
the double-edged
candidate
sword,
Trump
right?
did.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Sure. So I'm aware of the pressure of time here, so I think if we carry on this conversation sort of offline, I'd just like to introduce Janine Herrera of the French Foreign Ministry, because we are going to be talking about the French connection, if you like. We are going to be talking about Macron leaks and the concept of digital resilience. And if you think we've been talking for a lot of the time about the problem and some of the solutions we've come up with, the big picture, certainly as far as we think, is to teach societies how to be more resilient to disinformation, information attacks, and propaganda. And I would certainly argue that, in fact, the case of the Macron leaks, no matter how clumsily it was done, that is a case in which a society and civil society managed to respond in a way which prevented the impact that the people who dropped the leaks would have hoped for. We have a slight technical hitch because one of my slides has dropped out. The point I'm going to spend.
So does everybody know already, Ben, that you were one of the key people who uncovered what happened with Macron leaks, who traced it back?
I wish they did, but they probably don't.
Well, let me tell you, because I'm one of the first people that called him and asked, Ben, what's happening on this? When the Macron dump happened and the hashtag Macron leaks started to show up, one of the first people you saw talking about it was Ben, and he was able to trace back to the very first attempt to propagate this massive dump of information by tracing it back on Twitter, I think was your, and
right.
going to Reddit and some of the other sites. And I think you'll take people through the TikTok here. But it was a big moment for Ben, and it was really great to be able to call him up and go all the way back. And I'm sure it was useful to the French government as well, the work that he was able to do.
Thanks, Terry. And it was a fascinating moment. But actually, in terms of digital resilience, the story starts long before the French election. And in fact, for me and my involvement in this started in about September 2016. So before Macron had even launched the En Marche campaign. And this is and I didn't even know at this point that this is what I was building up to. But I had been doing some Twitter research on Putin and what people were talking about Putin. And my first slide was meant to be showing you some of the research. Purely coincidentally, I came across a Twitter user called Jack Posobiec, who is he labels himself as the Slav right. If you haven't heard of the Slav right, it's kind of like the alt-right. It's white supremacists, but it's not just white supremacists, it's Slavic white supremacists. I came across this because Posobiec was tweeting about Putin, and because I am a bit of a Slavophile and I speak a couple of Slavic languages, I thought this was quite interesting. So I just did a little check of the Slav right. I didn't find much on it, but I did find a tweet from Jack Posobiec introducing some of the leaders of the Slav right above a photo of the presidents of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia.
When they were at the White House?
When they were at the White House. And if there's one thing that it's probably worth knowing about the Latvians, the Lithuanians, and the Estonians, is that none of them are Slavs. Latvian and Lithuanian are Baltic languages, and Estonian is a Finno-Ugric language. So I kind of, I recognized the name Jack Posobiec. I thought, okay, he's mad about Slavs, but doesn't actually know about Slavs, and I left it at that. Okay, but I'm explaining this to you because this does actually have relevance for the Macron leaks. I'm not actually into my dementia yet. The next step, December the 24th, 2016, when all of us should have been celebrating something far more interesting than disinformation, somebody was not, because on December the 24th, 2016, on a Reddit group called The Donald, which is notorious for fake news, somebody posted a piece of the most incompetent piece of fake news I have ever seen, which takes quite some doing. The basic thesis of this piece of fake news is that Angela Merkel, the lady in Germany, was willfully allowing ISIS to operate in Europe so that she could then use the EU army, equipped with tanks secretly bought from NATO, to invade her neighbours. Even if you get drunk, it doesn't make sense. And it's full of grotesque inaccuracies, like the idea that NATO has secretly been selling tanks to the EU army. Perhaps somebody should have told the author that NATO doesn't actually own any tanks.
Nor that the EU doesn't have an army.
And the EU doesn't have an army. It's like, it's idiocy. And the reason I am bringing this up is because I've been looking for fake news targeting Merkel at the time. And so I did a little post on this, and it was posted on Reddit, and it emerged that there was a little group of Reddit fake news actors who were all posting this stuff. So I did a little article on this. For the purposes of this discussion, the important thing, the author signed it as pleading the YIF. This is the account which posted it on the Donald subreddit and a load of other subreddits. And I thought, it was kind of bizarre. Who the hell is this pleading the YIF? And unusually for a Reddit account, pleading the YIF later posted a separate post saying, my name is William Craddock. Okay, so we have, and this is a post from pleading the YIF, so we have an identification of the author. And he said that he was setting up a new media outlet called Disobedient Media. Okay. Again, I wasn't particularly interested in who the hell this guy was or what the media was, but I just remembered, okay, the name William Craddock and the address Disobedient Media. Okay. I mainly did a story on what a weird piece of fakery this was. We move on. France, 2017. France is having an election. And you have, by about February, the two leading candidates are Emmanuel Macron, who is centrist, pro-Atlanticist, pro-EU, and you have Marine Le Pen, who is anti-lots of things. Marine Le Pen had a very dedicated Twitter following. They were very, very well organized. And they would launch repeatedly hashtag campaigns where they would say, let's launch this hashtag and get our hashtag to trend. If you look at the account which is doing this, it's an account called Samuel, whose handle is Mesmer. Okay? Mesmer is a classic example of a shepherd account which controls a whole herd of bots. And what he would do, and about 4 or 5 other accounts would do, they would launch their hashtag, and in the space of an hour, they would rack up 25 to 45,000 tweets, and they would make their hashtag trend. I mean, purely in terms of the mechanics of creating a hashtag and getting it to trend, it's brilliant. It's really well organized. And so I did a case study on this because I was just fascinated by the level of skill which they showed. And week after week after week, they were doing this. Interestingly, they plateaued at about 45,000 tweets and about 8,000 users. They never really got beyond there, so there seemed to be a cap on their activity. But if you put this together, totally coincidentally and weirdly, by May 2017, I had met this weird guy called Jack Posobiec online. I'd met the fake information actor called William Craddock online, and I'd met Mesmer online. Okay? Now we come to the crucial moment.
You were talking to them? You were actually corresponding with them?
No.
Okay.
I was reading what they'd written, but I didn't feel that exposing myself would be particularly wise. Now we come to the time of 10 to midnight on the 5th of July. At which point my mobile phone went off with a phone call from the Reuters tech correspondent asking, what do you know about Macron leaks? To which I replied, absolutely nothing, you just woke me up. However, I turned on my software and I ran my software scan on the phrase Macron leaks. And this software will reach back through time and it will pull out all the tweets on a specific subject. And then it will order them by the most active users and the most popular words and the top hashtags and the top mentions. And the top mentions are the accounts which get most mentioned on this hashtag. Now, I ran this particular summary at about 11:30 in the evening, UK time. So it had only been running for 3 hours, the Macron leaks hashtag. I looked at the top mentions, and what did I see? Who's getting mentioned a lot? It's an account called Jack Posobiec. Who's getting mentioned a lot? It's an account called Mesmer. Who's getting mentioned a lot? It's an account called Disobedient News. Are these all ringing bells? I looked at that in my semi-fuddled state at about 10 to midnight on the Friday night and thought, hang on, I know these people. I've written about these people before. This is not just a random collection of addresses for me. That Jack Posobiec is the Slav right guy. Mesmer is the Twitter army controller for Marine Le Pen. Disobedient News, that's the outlet that William Craddock did, which did the fake news piece about Angela Merkel. And so what I was able to do, literally in the space of 10 minutes of getting the phone call, was I was able to phone Reuters back and say, okay, I can tell you where this started. I can tell you where the story spread. And I can also tell you, look, there's the first tweet. It's Jack Posobiec. There's William Craddock. And if you look at the times there, Posobiec launched the hashtag, Craddock tweeted about 8 minutes later, and he was tweeting a story from Disobedient News. That's really, really fast to put together a story if you haven't pre-cooked it.
But Ben, remember he had also previewed in a tweet that this was going to happen.
That's right. There had been. It turned out there had been chat on the 4chan channel going on for a while before then. And there's Mesmer's tweet. Now, Mesmer's tweet is quite interesting. It came about an hour and a half later, and it attributed the original dump to WikiLeaks. So it misattributed it. That could either be misdirection, or it could be that Mesmer didn't know that this was coming. It's an interesting question to ask. And then there's a brilliant analyst in Belgium called Nicolas van der Biest, who does the same kind of bot analyses I do, but with much, much better graphics. And he, simultaneously with me, identified Jack Posobiec and Mesmer as the launchers of this campaign. So we had two different sources saying the same thing. And then look at these amplifiers. These are the top users of the hashtag Macron leaks in the space of 3.5 hours that evening. Top of the list, Don't Tread on Memes. 294 tweets in 3.5 hours. Hands up if you think that's a real human user. Hands up if you think that's a bot. Yeah? That was a bot account. We have bot amplification. Gegelter 2013, 157 tweets in 3.5 hours. Human or bot? It's probably a bot, isn't it? You look down that list, every single one of those is probably a bot. There's a mixture of English language ones and French language ones in there. But again, this was in the space of a few minutes running the software. This is the kind of stuff which came up. The upshot was therefore the top 50 accounts between them posted 3,801 tweets in 3 hours. That's about 1,300 tweets per hour from 50 accounts. Again, do we think that that is a human pattern, or is that bot amplification? That's bot amplification. And that's the kind of things you get by running the software and actually recognizing the patterns you're looking at. The combination was by the Saturday morning, so within about 8 hours, that was the story on Reuters. US far-right activists, WikiLeaks, and bots helped to amplify the Macron leaks. This is not a story about the leaks. This is a story about who's pushing them. New York Times, US far-right activists promote the hacking attack against Macron. The story there is not the hacking, it's about who's promoting it. Le Monde, picking up on Nicolas van der Beest. It's a story about who is behind the leaks. It's not about what is pushing the leaks
They misspelled
themselves.
his name.
Yeah, and it's putting out his name.
Wrong.
And this is what you have when you manage to get the information out quickly and precisely. Who is behind this? What are they doing? And why? Because if it's the far right pushing a hashtag in an election which is between a far-right candidate and a centrist candidate, it's pretty obvious what effect they're trying to achieve. And in terms of targeted interference, there is evidence that this was targeted interference. This was not just somebody finding something interesting on the internet. Because we have this tweet from a lady called Cassandra Fairbanks, who used to work at Sputnik,
Oh, I didn't see
quoting
that.
Jack Posobiec as saying, "I just raped Macron worse than when he was 15 on the night of the election." It's pretty twisted. But is that a guy who was deliberately trying to undermine a presidential election? It certainly looks like it, doesn't it? But thankfully, it didn't work. But for me, the lesson of digital resilience is you need to know the actors. You need to identify the connectors. How did the story get from the far right in the US through to France? It was through WikiLeaks and Mesmer. And you need to track the amplification. Who's passing it on? Is it humans or is it bots? And the only way you can do that is to do it in advance. Because if you wait for the disinformation before you start the research, you're going to be too late. So if you are ever concerned about interference in somebody's election, like in Germany coming up, or like in Italy coming up, or like the midterms in the US next year, the time to start the research is now. And you don't know where the stuff is going to drop, but you can look at who are the likely actors. You can look at the pattern. Who are the disinformation actors that we know about? What are their amplification networks? Find them, analyze them, and then remember them. And if you see a big document drop coming, look at who is pushing it and why are they likely to be pushing it. And that is the start to be able to actually handle this kind of attack. So that was my experience of the Macron leaks and the whole build-up to it. I'd be very interested to hear what Janina has to say from the French government side.
Thank you, Ben. It's a very important work you're doing, and I think the connection between the journalists and your job is actually an example of how you can come up with very interesting headlines and how to change the narrative quickly. I think you've heard a lot about Macron leaks, and I'd like to give you maybe a few elements that was not in the press about the maybe inside discussion we were having and a few dilemmas we faced and how we solved it, both from the state side and as the En Marche campaign. So first of all, we knew that we were kind of next on the list. We had followed some kind of pattern of interference into electoral processes, and we were expecting that something would happen. American colleagues had warned us as well, but we didn't know where and when and how and what. So it was an awkward moment where we were kind of on alert, but we didn't know exactly what would happen. And then nothing happened, basically, for a long while. We could only see the usual buzz coming from RT and Sputnik, but nothing else. So the conclusion my conclusion for a while was that basically whoever would like to support extremist view or populist view or pro-Russian views, they don't need to interfere because, you know, like the center of our political landscape was crumbling for different reasons, and the far right and far left were very strong, stronger than ever. And out of the 5 main candidates, 3 were kind of completely aligned on Moscow's geopolitical agenda in Syria and Ukraine, on NATO, on the EU. So, and then what triggered a change in our analysis was, like for the Germans, when we understood what was happening in the US election, that the fact of not taking this issue up and crying wolf had actually a massive impact on the result of the elections. So that's when basically the state was quite swift and took some initiatives. And then the people of En Marche were very smart in the tactical moves they made. And then there was the media and the society that played a very constructive role. So those are the 3 elements, and I can discuss this now. The state also was faced with the same dilemmas that was described before in the US context, that if we interfere now, we will see as being as protecting one candidate over the other, or favoring one program over the other. So there was a huge question of neutrality. But we found ways around, and our national agency for the safety of our systems, information systems, actually published a communiqué in October 2016 raising awareness publicly about the dangers of hacking and phishing. That's how you call it, yeah. And then they invited each party to come for a day of kind of training, raising awareness about basic cyber hygiene measures. All attended except for Marine Le Pen, of course. And then following that, Ministry of Defense announced in December 2016 cyber army ready to retaliate in case of attacks. So that was another element. And then after the hack of En Marche, basically we stepped up the language and the action. My minister at the time, Mr. Hérault, had pointed the finger at Moscow. This is less it was less present in the media, but he said, this is a matter of national sovereignty. We will not tolerate any interference, being from Russia or anyone else. And we were surprised by this language as well. And then we cancelled online elections for French expats because it was too risky. So that was when the state acted. And then, of course, there was En Marche, and En Marche had 4 tactical moves that were very bright. First of all, they decided to cry wolf like Angela Merkel. They thought, if we tell the people this is coming, it will have, we will help immunize the public opinion against this campaign. So that was the first move. The second move was that they burst the bubble of rumors on social media at a very early stage. And it was pretty nasty, the campaign against the rumors against Macron. It was very personal. It was saying that he was a hidden homosexual and that he had hidden accounts here and there. So he basically took it up himself and said, this is ridiculous, and with a lot of humor, it was over. It was a dead end. So that was interesting. And in this respect, instead of following the usual line of action, which is don't take up rumors because you give them too much credit, there's no such thing as bad publicity, they ignored it. And they just said, no, we need to kill this from the onset. So that was very clever. And then you all know about it. They, instead of building a bunker around the database, they basically let the hackers come in and get useless information, massive amounts of useless data, and they planted fake news within this data. Last thing, confrontation. They went public and they said this is Russia trying to interfere in our elections. And of course there was the conference with Putin, which we all watched many times just out of pleasure. I think I did it actually.
There should be one happening, any minute now.
Yeah.
At the G20 that probably won't go the same way.
We should probably get the questions in quickly then.
Just we take. Yeah,
the media and civil society, I will not develop on that, but just maybe why did they fail? Why the Macron leaks failed? They were bad. Mainly, they were very bad, and we were a little bit good. Because they focused on, for instance, homosexuality. Well, it was a miscalculation. In France, it's not an issue. That's one thing. The fake accounts. Well, there was a massive corruption scandal already. There was a fatigue with the Fillon case. So this was not an interesting angle as well. And they were emboldened by previous successes, I think, by the US operation. And they came to France and they said, this is going to be a walk in the park. And they were taken by surprise when Macron actually started becoming a very serious presidential candidate. And they had nothing on Emmanuel Macron. So that's why there was a sense of panic and this last-minute drop. That's really something that will not happen. And next time they will be more prepared.
That's true. That's true. We've seen them lose one. Are there questions from people about the Macron case or about anything else? We're actually getting to the end of the day pretty quickly, so if you want to throw in other,
I'm kind of in an
questions?
obstructed view
Where are
seat,
we?
but
I don't see any.
I'm right here.
There's two of us,
I
but I'm
still
going to
can't
wait.
see you. Okay, I'm just going to listen.
Yeah.
Okay.
I really don't see you.
Dazzled by the lights.
Where, do you see who's talking?
No, I don't.
None of us know where.
We
Are
got
you
right
in
at
the
the
room?
back.
I'm right here.
There we go, right by the door.
okay.
Oh, hi, Damon. Oh, there. Thank you.
There we go.
Behind
You know,
here.
when Damon
Yeah.
Wilson is sitting there, you can't see anything else.
The Men in Black.
Luke Johnson from the Yale Jackson Institute. My question is about sequencing, and you touched on it a little bit before. To what extent did the fact that the U.S. had seen this movie before with the Hillary Clinton campaign play a role in the Macron campaign and kind of viewing this all as just the work of hackers and not legitimate news source, and I guess my question is, had the Macron election been a year before Hillary Clinton, would we have had a different result?
Sure. Yeah, but also bring in the fact that the time limit on reporting slammed down right after the dump happened. You can't discount that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, of course, we learned a lot, both I think France and Germany, from what had happened in the US, and the analysis is that the cost of inaction was underestimated because afterwards you realize it's brilliant. I mean, you didn't really cry wolf before it happened, and when it happened, then you have a major issue of legitimacy. That's a major crisis. So we decided we need to preempt this by raising awareness with our opinion, and this is a fight that we need to have all together with the media and the society.
Ben, does the difference in tactics give rise to the idea that it wasn't the same, that it couldn't possibly be the same group because one was done so awkwardly and one was done so well?
I think you need to bear in mind that there are different links in the chain. There are the hackers, and then there are the leakers. All the comment I've seen is that the hacking was the same group, APT28, Cozy Bear, the Russian-linked group. I think there was probably an attempt to say, well, hang on, we dropped it through WikiLeaks last time. Everybody is now looking at WikiLeaks and asking, what the hell were you doing there? We can't use that one again, so we need to find something else. It looks like the way that the Macron leaks were dropped was on 4chan, which is where the alt-right in the US congregate, and it's where they then picked it up and passed it on. And so it looks like you had the same leaker, but they chose to work through a different team, and frankly, they miscalculated. If you are trying to influence French nationalists, then doing it in English from America is maybe not your best bet.
That's true.
So I think we've got one more, and
Yeah,
then
I
we'll need
just
to cut.
one question in terms of anyone's thoughts on kind of the upcoming German elections, which Germany has already come out and said that Russia has stolen data, and they're preparing for what they believe will be kind of an onslaught of similar things, and obviously the Kremlin's probably got some lessons learned here in terms of what's working and what's not. But just kind of any thoughts on what's happening here coming up in Germany?
And have the German government consulted you on what you did that worked well?
Oh, not at my level.
In terms of what Germany, I mean, yeah, I think for everybody in the expert community, the question is when and where and how, not if. So I think we are all expecting to see something, but that is why we are also already preparing. It's no coincidence that as far back as January, I was looking at fake news channels in Germany. So on both sides of the line, you have this expectation that something is going to drop. Will it be exactly the same way again? No. Do we need to build up the digital resilience? Yes. is the way to build up the digital resilience, to study the ground already and identify the actors and monitor the flows? Yeah, that's the only way it's going to work. So we're all waiting for it to come. We don't know what it will be, but we're expecting it to be there.
Are there enough efforts going on now to educate the public, Ben?
That's what we're doing here.
Okay.
No, I think
Max?